Good morning, colleagues, and we are all very delighted to have you here present with us in this discussion on the localization agenda, specifically questioning the intermediary donor system. I am Jim Chik Fomunjong. I work at the West Africa Civil Society Institute as the head of the Knowledge Management Unit, and I will be co-moderating this session with my colleague, Omolara Balogun, who is head of the Policy Influencing and Advocacy Unit. Good morning, Lara.
Hi, good morning, Jim. Good morning, colleagues.
Great. Thank you all once again, and we are very, very delighted to have you all here this good morning. And we will be talking about the localization agenda and specifically questioning the intermediary donor system. It is very obvious that humanitarian aid contributes to save lives and alleviates sufferings of our citizens during disasters. When disaster strikes, local actors or organizations play a key role to respond to this disaster. The COVID-19 pandemic, which we are still experiencing today, and the Ebola pandemic, which affected some African countries, are glaring examples that afford us the opportunity to experience firsthand how local actors play a critical role as frontline responders to disasters that hit our societies. These actors, of whom we belong, have direct access and network to meet the needs of those who have been affected by these disasters. They know and understand the local context and hence can quickly respond to the urgent humanitarian needs. It is therefore without doubt that local actors are key instruments needed to sustain humanitarian responses. However, it seems to me and to many that donors have failed or have not sufficiently recognized or wholly appreciate the crucial place and role of organizations, of local organizations in delivering direct responses to victims of humanitarian disasters. A significant proportion of humanitarian aid is being channeled either through international non-governmental organizations, multilateral agencies, and or the United Nations agencies before reaching local organizations. In some cases, the funds are subgranted to local organizations, while in other instances, humanitarian support programs are subcontracted to local actors, or worst off, local actors are used as implementing agents. This is, of course, that phenomenon we call the intermediary donor system. This approach of delivering humanitarian aid breeds inequality and does not favor local organizations in our region. It does not fully promote equal partnerships between international non-governmental organizations and local actors. Also, it has not sufficiently ensured better coordination with local coordination mechanisms. To address this situation, instruments such as the Grand Bargain Agreement launched during the World Humanitarian Summit in May 2016 was put in place to facilitate access to resources by those who need it most. Specifically, the Grand Bargain Agreement aims to ensure that an aggregate target of 25% of global humanitarian funding is channeled as much as possible or as directly as possible to local and national respondents by 2020. That was last year. The question is, has this happened? Is this happening? Unfortunately, not. Commitments under the Grand Bargain Agreement have therefore failed to an extent. According to the 2018 report by ARNAP, the expected 25% share of the global humanitarian funding set to reach the global south by 2020 has not been achieved. And this is according to the 2018 report of ARNAP. In fact, only 3.1% of the total humanitarian assistance went directly to local and non-state actors. Even with this, local NGOs in the Global South received just about 0.4% of it. And this figure was the same in 2017 and 2016, according to the ANAP 2018 report. With such a performance, Degan Ali, director of ADESO, a Somali-based organization, describes localization as a rhetoric. According to her, localization is a lot of nice aspirational language, but no real action and substantive systems change. On this premise, it is therefore important for us to find ways to ensure that there is a substantive systems change, one that will ensure that the underlying goals of the localization agenda are fully met. It is for this reason that we are convened here to interrogate this intermediary structure within the philanthropy or donor funding system to identify how it is altering the localization agenda initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this important discussion, the first of a series of discussion that WACSI, the Star Ghana Foundation, and the Global Fund for Community Foundations will be organizing in the next couple of months to ensure that as actors within these systems who are equally being affected by what is transpiring within the systems, we can have a voice and of course, shape ideas that can inform how this system can best serve those who are working within the system. We will therefore this morning be having a deep dive into this important subject matter, and we'll be exchanging with some of our outstanding thought leaders in the region and seasoned practitioners in the philanthropy space in our region, whom my colleague, Omolara Balogun, the head of policy influencing, will be introducing to us in a moment. Omolara, please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Jim, for that interesting context. It's important that we set context so that colleagues joining us and of course our speakers can further understand some of the thinking that I've got into setting up this. Unfortunately, my internet is not so strong, so I won't be able to show my face today like I normally do. But my name is Balogun and I'm the head of policy influence and advocacy at WACSI. It's my pleasure to co-moderate this section with you today, Mr. Jim Chick. We have seasoned practitioners that will be contributing the localization in the intermediary donor system. List is Cheno Bar. Cheno is the co-founder and co-CEO at Purposeful, an organization that works so that girls and their allies can have access to resources, networks, and platforms. At 15, Cheno founded and led the Children's Forum Network, a mass movement of children who mobilize children's voices to be included in peace and reconciliation efforts in Sierra Leone. Cheno also went to lead initiative for UNFPA in New York and Liberia, Nike Foundation in Ethiopia and Portland, CRS in the Philippines, and recently at the Population Council. In 2012, Ms. Barr co-founded a Word at School, a global mobilization and campaign organization for global action. He was appointed by UNICEF Executive Director to the International Task Force on Workspace in 2018. Cheno, if you just say hi, we can see your face very briefly and then you can wave to us. Cheno, are you there?
It's a delight to be here. Thank you for that introduction. Yes, I'm here.
Excellent. Thank you so much. The next person we have here is a very good friend of mine, Gima Foje. Gima is the acting Chief Executive Officer of TY Jima Foundation based in Abuja, Nigeria. He's an experienced grant administrator, a nonprofit manager with demonstrated history of working effectively with nonprofit organizations in Nigeria. He has strong humanitarian background and has worked as grant and partnership officer.
Okay, I think the internet challenge that my colleague Omolara is encountering is interrupting. So maybe I just pick it up from there. So Mr. Gima Foje is the acting chief executive officer of the T.Y. Danjuma Foundation. And he has a strong humanitarian background and has worked as grant and partnership officer in the same organization. He has equally worked as program officer and a research consultant with the West Africa Civil Society Forum and in Nigeria, and of course, the West Africa Civil Society Institute. Good to have you back, Gima. He has vast experience in financial management, capacity building, networking, project monitoring, and program evaluation. Good morning, Gima. Good to have you with us. Hello, Gima. Okay. I'm sure he
is in the room.
Yeah, I'm sure he will be joining us shortly. I'm sure his internet equally interrupted.
Okay, so, thank you so much, Jim. Can you hear me?
5 on 5, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, yes,
all
please.
Right, excellent. The next person is the next person is a very senior colleague of ours, Alhaji Ibrahim Tanko Amidu. He's an experienced development manager, civil society practitioner with over 2 decades. He has vast experience in strategic planning, monitoring and evaluation, institutional and capacity strengthening at all levels of governance. He has developed and implemented social development and governance programs and projects at all levels of governance, including from the Ghanaian Danish Community Program, where he acted as program coordinator. Alhaji Tanko has worked extensively with the government of Ghana, local and international civil society organization, and bilateral aid agency in Ghana. He is currently the executive director for Star Ghana Foundation. Alhaji, welcome to this webinar. I believe you are in the room. I guess I saw your name earlier.
Yes, I'm in the room. Thank you very much for the introduction and good to be here.
Oh, good to see you, sir. Good morning. The last but not the least of our speaker today is Miss Eme Iniekong. Eme, I'm sorry in case I didn't pronounce your surname correctly. Emma is the program coordinator for Philanthropic Circuit, a Pan-African nonprofit organization providing access to knowledge, resources, and tools to strengthen nonprofits and foster collaborations. As a programs and partnership specialist, developing as the benefit of a truly enabled, therefore dedicated to bridging the knowledge system and collaboration gaps in the sector. Emma is presently a fellow with the Future African Work at the Africa Civic Engagement Academy. She is also a member of the Reimagining INGO Social Lab and the WINGS Enabling Environment Working Group. Emma, you're welcome to this webinar today. If you're in the room, you can just say hi to us.
Thank you so much. And you did a great job pronouncing my name. Thank you.
Okay.
Great to be here.
That's my pleasure. Thank you so much, colleagues, especially our speakers, for joining this conversation today. We are really looking forward to tapping into your wealth of experience and knowledge that you're bringing on board. Emma, let me to start with you. It's interesting to see what your passion is. Looking at your short profile here, it says your interest is in bridging the knowledge system and collaboration gap in the sector. So I want to start with you, if you permit me. What are some of the systems that you have come across, that have been put in place in the intermediary system that does not support localization or access to donor funding from the South? Based on your own experience, how would you describe those systems? What are the features, and how have they, can you give a bit of background to how they operate?
All right, then. Thank you, Malara. Like I said, it's great to be here. I'm always excited to be in spaces where I can speak about African philanthropy, what we are going through, and how to just make the systems that we are living in really better. And to go over your question, there are actually quite a number of systems that are deterring optimum capacity, like for African nonprofits. There are determining localization agenda right now, and basically I'm going to just go over three that come to mind. First of which is the current system enables restrictive funding. So we find that a lot of grants, which are mainly the funds that nonprofits are looking out for, do not cover overhead and operational costs. The current system is a bit transactional. So most intermediaries who actually act as grant allocators on the continent have a sort of transactional relationship with the local actors. We like to call them, in philanthropy, indigenous nonprofits. They have a sort of transactional relationship with indigenous nonprofits, and you find out that funding comes with a lot of ropes and attachments that's quite restrictive and doesn't allow the nonprofits on the continent to be able to optimize, like I said, fully optimize their capacity or their programs. And this tends to affect impact. We saw this a lot during COVID-19 because you from our research and the data that we've gathered, quite a number of nonprofits before COVID-19 last year, before the pandemic, had donor relations with intermediaries, but yet they were still quite hard hit when the COVID-19 pandemic struck. And it really reflected how there was a weak structure for certain of these nonprofits, how the structure of funding needs to be changed. The system that we have currently, it needs sort of a revamp or to change, to move into a more transformational kind of approach, really. Secondly, and another system that is something that we have been speaking about in spaces that I am privileged to be in, really looks at the imbalance in power systems from the global north to the global south, which the African continent is part of. And you find out that this is encouraged in a way by the transactional systems that we have for intermediary donor funding. And when I refer to power and the imbalance really comes from the idea that there is a foreign aid and then a beneficiary relationship. And that is why even the words beneficiary and foreign aid are a little, are still being looked at in the context of what we're speaking about today. But this breeds an imbalance of power. So there is a reliance and the idea that there's a dependence by African nonprofits on foreign aid. There is the idea that we still need our benefactors to come and give us funds to run programs. You find African nonprofits or even communities who only believe that the way they can implement program and projects is by relying on the funds that a donor, who is usually an intermediary, can offer them. And then when they're unable to access this, their programs or their projects fall flat. So the balance system, the power system, to say, is still quite imbalanced. And it goes deeper than this. Of course, if you really look into it, you find out there is the question of equity, the question of how we look at development practitioners on the continent, the kind of responsibility that we are willing to give to them, the capacity that we are willing to help them build and grow. And then, like I said, thirdly, really, I've come to see, based on experience in this sector, that there seems to be a disconnect really between donors and the non-profits they are funding. And I'm going to explain. So when you create a system that, a transactional sort of system that says, okay, you create a donor, an intermediary donor gives out a call for grants, a call for applications, a call for proposals, you rarely see, and I've been to quite a number of grants writing sessions, and usually the grants writer or the experienced professional will say, build a relationship with the donor, build a relationship with the founder. But it is quite hard pressed for you to find local nonprofits who have been able to establish and connect and build relationships, effective relationships with donor organizations, with program officers for donor foundations, because there's just a distance that the kind of system that we have brings. There is really minimal points of connection. What the donors are saying, or what the donor system is saying, is, we have the funds to give you, you are running a project, bring us your proposals, we'll give you the funds you need, and then bring us a report. And that is basically the system that has been in operation over decades now, especially here in Africa. So even when a donor or two asks for follow-up, maybe evaluation reports, it's not done with a long-term plan in mind. It's something to just show that, okay, the money that was invested, we like to see a report telling us the returns. But where does this leave the non-profits who are involved? They do not have a 3-year, 4-year, 5-year, 10-year strategy based off the funds they've received. And because I've worked in the sector, I've seen this over and over again, even from interacting with other non-profits. So I'm going to give the floor back to you, Malara, and I think I'll be able to share.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Emma. I'm sorry, I have a bit of noise where I am, and it happens to be the only place I can access internet. But I hope you can all hear me all the same. I mean, thank you for giving us those experiences that you've had in the course of working within this space. And I think you will all agree with me that Africa as a continent is a major, or remains a major, recipient of official development aid from the international community. And most of this aid comes from INGOs, UN agencies, and the rich philanthropists. And looking at the track of our development process, personally, I'm not saying that's changing drastically over a couple of years, except we intensify our effort to make these changes happen, which means localization of aid agenda will continue to be a conversation we'll be having, consistently for some time, until we see visible changes. And this brings me to my next question to Alhaji Tanko. Alhaji Tanko, I think you agree with me that we need to, deepen this conversation around effectively localizing donor funding. I personally do not see donor funding going away completely in the next 5 years. Like Africa will become so rich, or development sector will become so well funded that we would not require, international or foreign donor assistance. But how do we begin to effectively localize donor funding? Permit me to also say that some of the international donors have given what they consider, valid excuses to why this kind of system is important. We have heard, comments around lack of capacity on African CSOs to absorb a huge amount of money, and so on. Lack of weak administrative or financial system to properly report on this kind of, donor. Let me ask you, you are a senior colleague in this field when we're talking about African language management. What are those elements you think we need to start considering as civil society development practitioner in that side of the globe to effectively localize donor funding. And it will be interesting to also hear from you, whilst providing response to this question, a kind of balanced contributions for both sides, both for donors and for us as civil society in the global south. How can we effectively localize donor funding?
Right. Thank you very much. I think perhaps one of the questions that we need to ask as we have this dialogue is really that who is at the table in this conversation? Is it those of us who are used to interfacing with the donors and the INGOs that are then beginning to develop an understanding, a concept, a strategy for localization? Or we just, which is almost like a replication of the relationships, just that this one involves us, in the South. Because I think one of the issues that we haven't really challenged ourselves sufficiently about is how to make these conversations more inclusive, that we are bringing on board other voices, who matter, who are the points of development, local CSOs, community-based organizations, etc. That their views are also reflected in these conversations around localization, what it means and how it should be done. So I think that's one of the things that we need to take into consideration as we continue with this dialogue, that we need to be more inclusive of the voices of communities, in the discussions. I think in terms of what needs to be done, we have framed the conversation again around resources, funding. And I think that when we talk about localization, we should be looking beyond localizing how the funds are managed, who, etc., accounts for it, to looking at determining who determines, what the development priorities are, who determines, the strategies for addressing these issues, and how do we mobilize, utilize, and account for the resources that come in to address these challenges. That, for me, in a way, also expands the issue of localization beyond the one about donors, which is quite important, but also the localization in terms of the frameworks, the strategies around which we mobilize the resources that we seek to want to localize. So flowing from this, I think there are a number of issues that we need to look at. One is that so long as the bulk of the funding comes from donor countries, Western donors, etc., these will ultimately also come with, the conditions, some of which may actually work against the localization agenda. I remember we went for a meeting with the then DFID, secretary, etc. And then when we're talking about all this, he just said, look, for me, I'm accounting to the House of Commons and to the British taxpayer. And I want to see, I measure impacts in terms of the number of needles that British money is able to stick into somebody's bottom in terms of vaccination. I'm looking at the desks that we provide and etc. And so all these other things that you're telling me, I can't use that to account to the British taxpayer. So it's almost a way in which the source of funding then determines how the funding is utilized and accounted for. And so the issue of local resource mobilization becomes quite urgent, in this regard. Those of you or those of us who receive funding directly from FCDO would, recognize this in a situation that occurred. We just call you and say, look, because of cuts over there, we are cutting this by 60%, and we want you to focus on issue A, B, C. And that is it. It's a give and take thing. So I think the issue of local resource mobilization becomes quite important in this discussion. The second issue, I think, is looking at, how do we address some of the issues that they use to fight the localization agenda. The lack of capacity, so to speak, to comply with the requirements. So they say, well, your organization, the local organization cannot manage this quantum of funding. You can't do this. So how about we looking at how we can work in a more joined up way, that at the local level, we begin to look at networks of local organizations that can then, as a collective, interface, negotiate with donors, whether we're looking at local philanthropy or we're looking at, bilateral and other donors. I think the whole issue of, localization, the interpretation of localization by some INGOs, which is kind of like subcontracting the heavy lifting to local organizations and call that localization. We need to also challenge those narratives. But that is not what we mean by localization, that you subcontract the work with us, you reduce the number of expatriate faces on the ground, but ultimately the decisions are made, somewhere else. So how do we arrive at the kind of situation where we sit at the table as equal participants or equal partners to discuss, first of all, what needs to be done and how it has to be done, and then because in some cases we focus on the funding, and then that whole issue of what needs to be done in the strategies have been written by somebody else in their bid. They submitted a bid to whoever, FCD or USAID. And so they are presenting you with a fait accompli. And I think that we should look at that whole chain and see where we participate. And that's where I think this issue of working in consortia, alliances, etc., is quite important for us as local organizations. Of course, down the line, later in the discussion, we can begin to unpack some of the requirements that disempower us and keep us away from being able to be there as equal partners. You talk about value for money, and the way in which value for money is framed immediately, begins to measure value against metrics that, you may not, be able to or do not resonate with you. And therefore they say, okay, we have to bring a VFM specialist to come and help you on this, accountability, etc. So I think beginning to even unpack some of those things that we take for granted, and to see how those then inform the ways in which we engage with the partners. But in terms of all the other things, working through INGOs, working through local intermediaries that are only like kind of passageways for the flow of funds and not really localizing, working through basket funds, etc. I think all these things, have not served us very well. And we need to then look at what are the alternatives that we are presenting when we talk about these mechanisms not really working in our interests. So that's what I would like to say for now. Over. I hope I've understood your question and answered it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very insightful submission. And you really... Yes, Omolara, please go on. Thank you.
You have points which I'm going to do now.
I don't know whether it's from my end, but I can't hear Omolara.
Yes. So thank you very much. Cheno, can you hear me now, please?
I can hear you, but I couldn't hear her. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you very much for those insightful full point, Alaji Tanko. And it's really very interesting to hear you say we need to challenge the narratives such as the weightlifting, you know, all these narratives that are rather standing as impediments to an agenda that is really supposed to serve us significantly as we wish. Cheno, I will come to you now, and you know, and still building on the submissions of Alaji Tanko and Eme, you know, I'm just falling back on the statement by Dagan, you know, where she says the localization agenda is a lot of nice aspirational language, but no real action and substantive systems change. You know, looking at the scope of your work and building or looking at what other colleagues have submitted with regards to, you know, what we really need to factor in to ensure that there is a substantive systems change when we are talking about the localization agenda. You know, what is your take about this view of Dagan, you know, particularly within the Sierra Leonean context, and why not? I'm sure many of us across the region would resonate with that. Thank you, Cheno.
Thank you so much. It's great to be part of this conversation, and thanks for all the very insightful comments we've already had, most of which I completely agree with. I think to go back to this point, we need to ask ourselves or be reminded of the words of Martin Luther King. Money is power. Power has never, ever given away power voluntarily. In fact, there's no time in history where the people who are holders of power just voluntarily just give up that power. What needs to happen is a systematic organization, organizing, challenging, and demanding the kind of systemic reforms we're talking about. At the end of the day, the entire donor complex, the donor infrastructure, and for us at Purposeful, just for folks who don't know about Purposeful, we're a global hub, we're based in Sierra Leone. We provide resources to organizations, to groups, formal and informal, registered and unregistered groups across the world. And last year during COVID, we funded in over 90 countries. And we're very proud of that because we do not have, and I will talk about how this notion of understanding it from a power perspective is critical to understanding how you're going to make a shift in this discourse. One is this underlying idea that there's money, and money is equal to power, and the people who both hold the resources understand that it gives them power to dictate priorities, power to dictate, you know, what we do, what we can say, and what we cannot say, and just the power to control us in many ways. And those who are also in the middle, the intermediaries as we call them, also have an incentive. They're not neutral. They need to maintain their systems and their organizations, pay their staff, and all of that is not unreasonable at face value, right? People need to survive. People need to exist and continue. So when we go back to Dagan's point about localization, about how we think about moving it from rhetorics to action, we need to challenge the very foundations of the current global aid infrastructure. We need to understand that it is premised on a colonial and neo-colonial exchange transaction that treats us, people of color, Africans, with suspicion, that treats us, that it's a transactional exchange that is rooted in a desire to either control us, but also seen as very patronizing, that when they give us, it's from the goodness of their hearts, and therefore they can tell us and we have to report based on their standards and systems and the very foundations of the need for intermediaries and local pass-throughs is rooted in a system that we ourselves have not questioned enough. And that's the system that we need monitoring, evaluation, and learning, We need to write periodic reports. We need to submit all these financial reports. We need to go through, and all of these, I remember one of the first times we engaged local groups across this country, and one of the expressions that stayed with me is we eliminate them by complexity, that groups are used to being eliminated by complexity, even the means of accessing the resources and things like that. And what happens is the intermediaries just become a replication of the same neo-colonial structure that is not trust-based, that is based on, you know, you need to meet all these systems. So it does not build institutions. Emma was speaking about the fact that at the end of the day, it's, you know, it places all these burdens on us to do all these things that, frankly, nobody really needs. So what we need to do is to challenge this structure, this infrastructure, challenge who gets money, what the money should be used for. And that's what we're trying to do at Purposeful, to say that we can fund you without strings attached, that money is power, and we can make a statement. That's why we fund girls groups directly, and we do not have all these requirements and reporting requirements. That's why we fund registered and unregistered groups. That's why we do not, that's why, of course, our resources are unrestricted, because that's what gives people the opportunity to grow. That's how these other institutions were able to grow, because they had endowment. They have resources to be able to think. And so I think at the heart of this conversation for the localization agenda, to move from Degen's words, from rhetorics to action, we need, even in the discourse with these northern organizations or amongst ourselves, to be a little bit more radical, to say the very foundations of this infrastructure is based on a very colonial and neo-colonial enterprise that treats us with suspicion. And that's why you have all these rules. That's why you have all these reports. But we should be given the freedom to express ourselves, to cultivate resources internally, to create a system of peer monitoring and support of each other. And that would be the foundation of a more systemic shift in this space.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. And it's really good to hear that Purposeful as an organization, you know, you're shining the light, you know, and funding without strings attached. I think that is quite remarkable. Yes, Omolara, please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Jim. I think at this point, I need to declare my location. So I'm currently with our Guinea-Bissau infrastructure. It's quite a national problem. I don't think other countries in West Africa are pretty much better off anyways, but then I sincerely apologize for the, you know, in and out situation. Thank you so much to Alaji. I listened to you with rapt attention, and it's also interesting to see
I think we lost Omolara for a bit. Hello, Gima. I think
hi, Jim. Good to hear you finally. And hi, Lara. Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be part of this discussion. I think I'm hearing quite some very exciting things here. Good to be part of this.
Great, thank you very much. And it's good to know you're hearing some exciting things, and we just want to get your perspective on this very important issue. Thanks, colleagues, for all the insightful contributions that are coming on in the chat section. We will take some of them in the very near future. And if you have questions, please drop them there, as we will be channeling those questions to the panelists that you will definitely identify. We're coming to you, Gima. You know, we are talking about the localization agenda, and given that the foundation you work for, you know, is actually an African initiative driving an African or a Nigerian agenda, so to speak. And we are now gathering other perspectives of how, you know, a system has been put in place and it's not favoring, you know, development the way we in the global south, in West Africa, should look at it. So I just want to find out from you, Gima, you know, what pathways can be created with the African grant makers, you know, and foundations to ensure that there is an increased flow of resources to local actors?
Okay, thank you so much, Jim. I think before I even hit the nail on your question, I must say that I really couldn't agree more with the last speaker, Cheno. He really drove home the point. I think that should really be the starting point. And if you take it from where he ended, then there are bigger questions to ask, because then, you know, the first question would be, what or which system exactly are we trying to change? The discussion is around, you know, trying to modify the system of, you know, inequality, power play, a balance that is tilted against those of us in the global south. So where exactly do we start changing this system? Is it a centralized system that, you know, can be targeted for the kind of change we are having this discussion around? We need to find out what exactly we want to change. Where is it located? How do we change this system? And if you build on that, then you realize that there is a lot of work for us to do. And the second part of my question, a little bit uncomfortable, is what is the role of our own government? You know, what are the impediments from our own government in making sure that this localization agenda itself does not, you know, go the way we would like it to happen, as we are discussing here? Because it would seem to me that critically, especially coming from an African foundation, there is need for funders from the global north to develop and build fairer partnerships with local actors. It is critical. The whole discussion around institutional support and unrestricted funding is something that has been lingering and will continue to linger if there is no fairness in the relationship between those in the global north and those in the global south. So that is something which, you know, needs to be at the front burner. They call it a partnership all the time, but in reality, it is an unfair partnership. So we need to make it a little bit more fairer. There's a huge discussion around capacity. As local funders, we like to say we will also put a little bit of emphasis on capacity building. But what's the difference between what I see a lot of local foundations and donors doing and this other capacity that I hear my friends all the time within the civic space complain about? The local partner will tell you we need to discuss around financial management so that, you know, you submit a report that meets the certain requirement. Straightforward. Here's a template. We are done. You go. But there's another discussion around capacity building that we suffer as people in the global south, which is way, way, way more complex than, you know, the ordinary reporting. It is that technical capacity that we always do not have. It's that capacity report on finances that we always do not have, that you need a third party to come and help the local partner, and this help is endless. So there is a bigger discussion around capacity building that has to occur, which will help us move away from this dependency of endless capacity building. So one of my takes around this issue is that if the local actors need capacity building, we have a structured way of delivering this capacity building, and then let them take charge. They are the first line of response. Let them keep on with the work, not to have an endless discussion around capacity building. Now, another very important point for me is the need to promote local giving, local philanthropy, especially in the structured way around causes of interest to us. we need to promote giving, because we can have also an endless system of dependency on the global north. We need to generate resources from within and redistribute those resources to those causes that are of interest to us. Otherwise, the point I think Chena was making, really to summarize, is that, he who pays the piper dictates the tune. And if you want to set the agenda, if you want to be around the table, we need to know that that power play will always be an impediment we have to deal with. And so do we want to look inward and see if we can generate resources from our own end? So Jim, specifically to your question, I think part of the learning for us and how to make the foundation work a little bit differently has been, number one, to make sure that this discussion around institutional support. So as a foundation, 20% of our funding goes to our local partners as funds for institutional support, and they decide how they're going to deal with that, with salaries, whatever they're doing with. It is really unrestricted. They do what they want to do with it. Number two is that the discussion around capacity building is not telling the organization what capacity they need. It is generated from them. How can we help? So because that is being part of the agenda setting, what can we do? What can we do together? Then there's that identification process, which is what I think we need to also imbibe as fighters in this front around localization, to say, to be part of the agenda setting, we need to find a way in which we get to the negotiation table and decide how funds coming from the global north will address local issues, issues of concern to us. How do we get to be part of the agenda setting? I do not know, but I think that as a collective, we can find a way of being around when the agenda for such things are being decided. Because if we do not get to be on that table around the discussion when the agenda is being set, once the funds have been approved and allocated the way they are allocated, it becomes difficult to try to change the agenda. We now have to deal with all the complexities we are talking about. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. And you really highlighted the need for us to generate our own resources. What can we do together? And it was very insightful to hear you rope in our governments. Where are our governments in all of this? And what can we really, how can they ensure that together we collaborate and drive a process that will actually help us champion a development agenda that is actually our own. Just to take a couple of comments, T. Khan says, localization also isn't something that came from partner communities. It came from the northern institutions. So in that regard, as it doesn't reflect partner capabilities, the term itself is null and void. It's also an agenda we in the South are being forced to push when many of us simply want to just get on with our work and be credited for the change we bring in our own. Rose Maruru, equally, I think she aligns more with what you chipped in, Gima, and she says, what hinders us as Africans from funding our own organizations? Put another way, what do we need to do differently as African CSOs to unleash African agency and build strong local support? Even as we work to change the behavior of external funders, I think we need to be figuring out the barriers to local support and how to deal with this. Stigmata Tenga says, Tanko, thank you for raising the need to unpack value for money. And she capitalizes that, the value for money issue. The money is not the only way or resource required in community agency. Thank you all so much for these contributions. Another contribution here from Jamil Tanimu says, how does networking move beyond bringing CSOs together as a consortium just on paper and practice to actually combining efforts to create a robust organization with enhanced capacity to meet donor requirements? Thank you all for these insightful contributions and many more of such very interesting thoughts are being shared in the chat. We can read them and gain more insights. We'll pick a couple of them, share and share with our panelists to provide some responses to them. But I just want to come back to you, Eme. And actually, we are looking at, yes, we've described the current status quo, and we've looked at, majorly what hasn't favored us over the years. And concretely speaking, how, from our Global South perspective, from our West African perspectives, we work directly with our communities, with our peoples, with our governments, as Gima raised. What do we need to do concretely to ensure that we start, either redefining what this localization agenda is, or fixing what currently exists to ensure that it best addresses our needs? Amen.
Thank you, Jim. Hopefully everyone can hear. So I'm just going to go over a question of what we need to do to ensure that the localization agenda or a modification of it does great or works effectively in West Africa. Now I'm speaking as a Nigerian, though the organization I work with, Philanthropy Circuit, we do have a Pan-African approach to African philanthropy, and we do have lots of data and information from other parts of Africa. However, I am more in tune with Nigerian nonprofits, having also worked in a grassroots organization here in Nigeria. And it doesn't take much to see that, especially pulling from what Jima was saying, that African philanthropy can only progress if embraced wholly by Africans themselves, right? So if we as Africans, if we as development practitioners, philanthropists, if people have a turnaround in the way they imagine giving, in the way they imagine localization, then lots of the questions that I've seen being asked in the comment section and over the code, even the question that come to my mind as other speakers were discussing, would not come up at all. Now, one of the vacuums that we are trying to fill as Philanthropy Circuit is to create and curate knowledge, resources, and tools for African nonprofits. And a vacuum, we found out that there is really not much data. There is really not much information that nonprofits can access and use. And this, I'm going to just draw a line. So people have asked, people come to me and say, how do we go about resource mobilization, alternative, how is it possible to have alternative forms of resources and incomes as a nonprofit in Africa? And then I say, WACC has a report or a guide paper on alternative funding resources that nonprofits can use if they were aware of it, or if they are willing to even go through the paper and then engage the ideas that have been put forth. So for us and for me, it comes down to our knowledge systems. Mainly it comes down to our knowledge management, and then also it comes down to how we are able to really put out our voices. I'm really intrigued by the conversation that is going on in the comment section, in the chat, right? I'm really intrigued. And it just really, it adds to the conversation that we are having here as speakers, and for localization and the whole dictums and the words that are being used, beneficiaries, and how Africans themselves, like one of the points I had reflected while coming up with this, while leading up to this discussion, has been how African grant makers, African philanthropists can be better advocates, can be better advocates for philanthropy in Africa itself, for development. If you were to see Aliko Dangote stand behind one or two grassroots organizations, it gives them credibility. It gives them just a sort of awareness and brand visibility, really. That's what it does. So philanthropists in Africa need to advocate better. We need to work on our own perceptions and build our knowledge base here in the African continent, and then be more open to spaces, be more open to changing narratives, because that's very important. It's something that is a core mission of ours. Be more open to telling your stories, be more open to collaborations, to funding, to looking out actively for alternative funding. I was really excited when Jima mentioned how the T.Y. Danjuma Foundation allocates 20% of their funding to unrestricted funding and institutional capacity building, not for the non-profits, but initiated by the non-profits themselves, because it speaks to what they actually need and what is sustainable in the long run. So hopefully we're on the right course with this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it's actually very interesting to hear you highlight the value of knowledge generation, you know, from within our context to support this particular agenda that in a way that will best meet our needs and interests as a people. Alhaji Ibrahim, I will come to you, and you know, looking at your experience in Ghana and the great work that the Star Ghana Foundation is doing. Could you just share with us some of those concrete fixes, that you are putting in place or taking into consideration to ensure that, those stakeholders you are working with, those local actors, are actually put at the center of equality, in terms of partnerships when working with you or the Star Ghana Foundation?
Well, thank you very much. And this is a big ask. We are aspiring to achieve what you've just said, because it's not an easy journey. But I think I can share with some of the learning that is informing the ways in which we want to do development, we want to work with our partners, differently, particularly because of our transition from a mechanism set up by donors to manage funds on their behalf as a basket fund to a foundation that seeks to support, help to strengthen communities and community organizations to own and lead the processes of their own development. I think one is around the issue of the knowledge, the evidence generation that has already been indicated, that whatever our engagements, whoever we're trying to engage, whether it's the government of Ghana, whether it's local philanthropies and foundations, whether it is the donors from the North, these engagements should be informed engagements, that we can go there and talk broadly. But I think if we're able to demonstrate how doing development differently, how supporting communities and community organizations differently, leads to better results, so to speak, for the communities, for the nation, and etc., we would gain traction. So that whole investment in, generating the evidence, it is for me quite important. I think the second is we seem to think that local philanthropy or philanthropy is better. External philanthropy is not so good, But we sometimes, we should also realize that some of the local philanthropies, philanthropic institutions just mirror what happens, in our relationships with the northern foundations and philanthropies, that just by being local does not equal to being good. So a lot of engagements have to happen in order to ensure that we help to develop the kind of local philanthropy that supports our aspirations and where we want to go. Else we will end up with, a high net worth individual comes, I'm giving you this, I want you to do this, and then it's almost like a replication at a lower local level of what we experience at the other. So I think that whole thing about helping to shape the kind of local philanthropy that supports our aspirations is quite important. The whole issue of alliance building, coalition building, not just I mean, at all levels, of development is quite important. So that helps to address the issues around, capacity in codes that we're talking about, ability to meet compliance requirements, and etc. Because some of these organizations are such that it's very difficult for them as small individual organizations to meet some of the basic requirements, so to speak, that because whether we like it or not, whether it's local or it's foreign, there are some requirements for managing funds that we must all meet. And therefore, I think that whole thing about the promoting alliances and etc. is quite important. In my more idealistic, youthful days, we used to carry Marxist books around, and there was this term where quite enamored with us, the issue of class suicide, that you can be, at a certain class, but you need to commit class suicide in order to be able to understand and work with the classes that you are seeking to support. And I think for most of us, and with very due apology to everybody, a lot of organizations, NGOs, CSOs are products of the system that we are now kicking against. They are used to a certain way of working and engaging with donors. And unless we commit that kind of class suicide in quotes, it may be difficult for us to work on equal terms with, smaller local organizations that maybe are not as big as ours and as formalized and etc. So we need to begin to look at things from the perspectives of these local organizations. That's what I see in quotes, that whole issue around committing class suicide. And I think the whole thing about building from the bottom up, and bottom not in the terms of hierarchy, but just starting from the lowest levels of governance, the smallest levels of governance, and building up, rather than we having the conversations up there and then going to say, okay, we are coming to build awareness about, this new way of doing development or this different way of development. So we need to carry people along. It's quite important, and to start from the bottom, that we don't, place ourselves up there, that we are the ones who are going to think through this. And just finally, on this point, that whole issue of the term, the localization, I think it has come up again. And what we mean by that, because then what we may end up with is a very vague term that is so elastic, it can be stretched to fit whatever you want to do. And so we need to, I think the term localization in a way connotes trying to, the words fail me, but that it's something out there that we now want to make it local. Whereas maybe we want something that is completely different, not localizing a certain system, but just developing a new system that answers to our hopes, our aspirations, our struggles, our needs, our issues. So I think that is the point. I would stop here. I think if there are some questions on what I've said, I'll be willing to pick up. So over.
Thank you very, very much. And I very much like the last element about the whole concept of localization. And Cheno, I'll be coming to you. I'm just taking a point from Alex Mason in the comment section. And really before that, I was particularly keen on when you talked about alliance building as a force we can leverage on to ensure that we make what works for us to work for us. And really to commend the Star Ghana Foundation. Last year you brought together 8 of your partners to think and roll out initiatives to respond to COVID. And my colleagues will actually share, the lessons, the experience that came out of that in the chat section. But Alex Mason says localization has been popularized as a concept and a trend within one of the few Celoid aid international systems, the humanitarian one. From a national context, from a local national non-governmental organization, it doesn't make any sense because needs are not Celoid. And this is partly one of the main challenges because it doesn't talk to the communities And local, national, it says LNNGOs and their needs, their agendas. And again, Stigmata Tenga equally asked, what is local about the localization agenda? And, I'm throwing that to you, Cheno. How can we make, and when I talk of we, I'm talking about us in the global south, I'm talking about actors in West Africa. How can we make the localization agenda to actually be ours? Or what do we need to do to ensure that this agenda reflects our realities, represents our needs, and provides responses to those needs that we have as a people? Cheno?
I think that's a really excellent question. And it's at the heart of all of this conversation. Our ambition should not be to replicate this again. This system that we are currently existing in is not neutral. It was a system that was created, the aid relationship, the donor reports, the weekly visits, the spot checks, the M&E reports, the only a percentage on overheads and percentage of your fees on overheads and all that. That's a system. It was created by somebody and it serves somebody. And it's a neo-colonial infrastructure and it's built on a premise. Localization, the object of localization cannot be to simply replace the relationship and the systems within that by people that look like you and I. That's not localization. That's not transformation. And I like, I see a comment about, well, we're helping other organizations to now be able to get aid money from EU and all that. That's only a step. But really, that is simply creating these organizations in the image of the neo-colonial system. We're helping local groups to be much more bureaucratic, to create ridiculously expansive bureaucratic operations that are not about creating change, but they're about responding to donor requirements. And that's really important. We need to have two intellectual conversations and acknowledgement. One is that the current aid infrastructure has not worked, whatever worked means. Maybe it's worked for who it was created for, but the fact of the matter is, this system that they created about, all the steps and systems of giving little money here and fighting these little things here based on an agenda that we have to basically bid for and respond to and come together and build. It has not created the kind of changes that we want to see change and transform our societies. It's not what. We need to first acknowledge that. And secondly, if that system has not worked, why is localization about just, removing the players and replacing them with new players? It's a system that's not worked. It's an inherently flawed system. The question we like to ask ourselves is, if local groups that we're creating, let's say if they had unlimited resources and they wanted to make change in their communities, will they make change by setting up M&E structures, all those big systems, reporting officers, field officers? Is that the way social change happens? Is that the way really development happens, that locally driven? If localization is really about what locals want, if you go to a village and the kinds of communities that I work and you talk to girls and we work with girls, and you ask them, if I were to give you unrestricted resources, what are you going to do with it? I bet you they're going to come up with a lot more creative solutions than setting up an organization that can write a report and and be ready for field visits and be able to feed a donor system. It doesn't work. So the localization, it's about how do we, again, but we can do that. The other thing that I think one last point I'll make is we forget that this infrastructure cannot survive without our own participation in it. They need us. They're not doing us a favor. If we all turn around and say, you know what, we're not going to take your money if this money comes with the following strings, trust me, that system is going to crumble. But money is power. So they juggle that money in front of our faces and we need it. And they tell us we just need to change these few things. And those few things really, at the end of the day, question our ability to be really free, liberated, and do the things we want to do in the ways we want to do them. So we can start by saying, hey, all of us, we can mobilize and say, this is the way that local, this is what local means. It should be what we do, how we do it, the ways we do it. And if you have your resources, good. You can give us these resources, but it's not going to be based, again, on this lack of trust-based system where you have to kind of look up on us and we spend half of our times either paying consultants or just feeding you this infrastructure that really is worthless. It's completely pointless. And it's not about building us in an image of these institutions that, frankly, again, we have to say, they don't work. It's important to acknowledge that. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. And you said something very interesting, that this structure cannot survive, without us, And Stigmata Tenga in the comment section, she says we need to stop depending on external funding that undermines the existing capacities on our communities and people. We need to set our own agenda, a community-led agenda. Thank you very much, Stigmata. And I'll try as much as possible to take some of those insightful contributions that are coming up in the chat section. Please, if I don't read yours, just bear with us. They are really trooping in their numbers. You can read them to have a foretaste of what other colleagues are saying. And thank you all for sharing those. And over to you, Gima. We are looking at a situation where we need to ensure that whatever we are having in front of us should serve our needs as West Africans, as actors within the global South. So can you flesh out or add more salt to what you already shared initially on some of those things that we need to be doing as actors within the system to ensure that whatever is being driven or we are driving in our communities, should serve best our interests, within this entire localization and agenda framework. Gima?
Thank you, Jim. I was really busy also reading the comment. I think the comment section is really very exciting. A lot of interesting discussions going on there. Look, I will again go back to especially the point number one I made, which is simply that this discussion we are having has to be broadened to include those that will have to take those necessary steps that will reflect the things we are interested in. And that will mean finding a role for those funders in the North, since the whole localization argument and discourse is around that power interplay between funders in the North and local actors. We need to find a place for them in the discourse. Number two is, what is the incentive that they will do all these things with one that will amount to localization? What is the incentive that they will do that? We need to interrogate that. We will want to see certain things happen. But what is the incentive? What's the motivation that a particular donor or the donors, for that matter, will do those things we would like to see? We have to ask that. Again, the interests of those within the civic space, our interests, do they align with the interests of government? It's very important to recognize that why donors in the global North are supporting civic group and NGOs do a couple of things and a whole lot. They will also, in many instances, happily engage governments and give governments these resources. If, like my brother Cheno was saying, if we said no, and my quick response was, government will say yes and get the resources. So our interests, do they align with that of government? Are we on the same page? Do we see things in the same way? The constituencies we represent and serve are the same constituencies that government also represent and serve. And so our understanding and interests will have to align at some point if we want to make sure that some of the things we really aspire to achieve, we end up getting them. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. You're really hammering on the role of the government and to equally come on board as an equal partner to help us address this. Again, back to the comment section, Janet Mawio says, I think we should also stop propagating language, and she puts that in quote, language that does not push our agenda, like being called an intermediary. What's that? Someone without a position, a contractor. How can such an organization support community priorities? Et s'il vous plaît, pour nos collègues qui peuvent communiquer seulement en français, bien vouloir partager vos avis. Ça, c'est un sujet qui nous concerne tous. Donc, bien vouloir partager vos avis dans comme commentaire et on fera notre mieux pour lire quelques avis qui viennent de notre part. Ça serait très, très important de comprendre comment vous sentez cet phénomène dans vos différents pays. Merci beaucoup. Stigmata Tenga also says we need to celebrate African philanthropic giving practices and reclaim the power. I think that's a very solid recommendation there. Thank you very much, Stigmata. From Suzanne Jambi, we need to go ahead and also challenge our narrative. Is it lack of capacity of local actors or misalignment of capacity tools to the capacity needs and skills that exist? Is it lack of documentation or our limited interest to consume locally generated information and promoting our indigenous information and storytelling approaches? I think that is a very, very solid one. And maybe I'll just pause here and come back to you, Eme, because you are really at the forefront of knowledge generation and promoting knowledge dissemination and knowledge use on African philanthropy. So building on this, what can we do to ensure that, locally generated information, indigenous information and storytelling on issues that can promote this agenda to work for our good? What can we do to ensure that that knowledge angle of it is not lost in this entire system? Eme?
All right, thank you, Jim. Like everyone has noted, the comment section is where it's popping, as we say. So for knowledge generation, it really brings to mind, my mind, non-profits. Now, I'm glad that I'm in a space where there are quite a number of non-profits available, and I try to tell as many as I can, wherever I can. Start by telling your own stories. Whoever is going to be working on research, whoever in whichever other non-profit across the continent is going to be looking out for non-profits like I do on a daily basis, will only be able to identify the work you do because you are actually saying something, because your story is actually being told. So take advantage of digital media, take advantage of social media, take advantage of even in-house. Now, I want to encourage nonprofits to have actual reports. Go back into your own structure. There are things you can do to build your own personal capacity. Structural capacity is very important as nonprofits. It tells you, you do not have to wait for someone, an outsider or someone external to tell you who you are, right? If you have the data that you need, if you have reports, if you've been around for 3 years and upwards as a standard nonprofit operational, you should have information about what you do, about the impact that you've had, about what you are going to do, because it is from your past information that we have that we can project what you are able to do in the future. And this is what donors are actually looking out for. But not when I say donors, I do not mean even external donors now. I mean donors on the continent. For people to want to collaborate, for people to want to reach out to you, they would need to see that you are actually doing something, that there is impact that is being made in your sector. You could be in health, you could be in development, research, you could be in education, you could even be a philanthropist. I've come to meet people who give out money on a recurring basis, but they would not call themselves philanthropists because language, right? They will not say, oh, giving out a particular amount of money, even if it's in Naira. In Nigeria, we use the Naira, and even if you give out 5,000 Naira every month, to them it doesn't add up. But the reality is that we have a lot more philanthropists here on the continent than we acknowledge or we are willing to look to. So if we have even foundations, there are foundations that have allocations for other nonprofits who are willing to say, okay, I am a bigger non-foundation in education, and I have an allocation I can give out because usually there is a philanthropist that is backing them, an indigenous philanthropist backing them, who is able to say, oh, we're also willing to, as states, we're also willing to give out money, but they would not be able to do this if there is no information about what you as the nonprofit are doing or what other nonprofits are doing in their sector. So this is what knowledge is very important to have and then to also share. And as I'm also going to just say this, collaborate. Look out for other people who are in your space, come together and do great work. And I think someone also mentioned it in the comment section, how resources, in as much as we know and we believe that resources refer to money, right? But we also have human resources, we have the power of connection, the power of research, all these fall under resources that we can take advantage of here on the continent and grow. The aim and the plan of discussions like this and conversations like this is to have a database grow, to have our data sets here on the continent grow, so that those who are coming in, practitioners who need the information that we have, they have it easier, they have sets to fall back to, they have references to make. And even when we're engaging with external bodies, right? Even when we're engaging with people what we call external or foreign partners, we are engaging with them based on information that we have, using data that we are able to gather on our own from the continent. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you very much. And just to use this opportunity to say, organizations like the West Africa Civil Society Institute, we are working hard to gather as much data as possible on these issues and other issues related to our work. So you can visit our website, the publication section, and you'll actually find resources on a piece of research that we conducted on local giving in Ghana during the COVID-19 pandemic. That was last year, and thanks to the support of Star Ghana Foundation that enabled us to do that. We also have resources that we've collaborated with the African Philanthropic Network to publish. So there are a lot of resources there that we can visit, share our feedback, share your feedback on what we can improve upon, and we will be glad to do that. And why not, if you are interested in documenting this piece of information from your community, from your organization, your experience, that can help enrich this discussion, that can help provide some insights on ways to be innovative about addressing what we are addressing today, feel free to contact us, info@waxy.org, and of course, we will gladly work with you to ensure that we have the data we need to carry forward these conversations based on empirical findings. And we have a colleague, Khan, from South Asia. He says, I'm from South Asia, and we feel the same way and have similar challenges with donors and intermediaries. The more we connect amongst ourselves, the more we will be able to build this into a movement. I think that is really a strong recommendation. And I think Cheno raised that we should work collectively, and other panelists to ensure that, we have a movement that can address this. Thank you to Waxy and Star Ghana and the Global Fund for Community Foundations, for this opportunity. Portia says, listen, what is the problem, or what are the problems? We local NGO actors, what are the problems we local NGO actors know? I'm sure she's responding in providing information with regards to some of those key things we need to take into consideration as leverage, to enable us put in place a system that will best respond to our needs. So Portia says, listen, what is or are the problems we local actors know? Have a handful of committed volunteers who will really address daunting tasks. 3, have 2 or 3 or 1 driver coordinator who can implement. 4, meet with donors no matter how many cancellations. Check in regularly with local NGO actors to remain on track. That is the element on collaboration. Agree on necessary accountability measures. Most of the above doesn't require major money. Volunteering money mostly, with gratitude, Portia. Thank you very, very much for that contribution or those key recommendations. Jenny Hodgson of the Global Fund for Community Foundations, in responding to a chat by Janet, says, I agree 100%. Intermediaries suggest something cold, transactional, all premised on movement of money and nothing to do with people and communities. And it's really, really important. And I'll build on this now. If we are to make sure that our actions focus more on people and communities, the people and the communities we serve, what are those key considerations that we need to make to ensure that our people and our communities are at the heart of our humanitarian or development-driven initiatives? Cheno, I will begin with you, and after I'll come to you, Alhaji Ibrahim Tanko. Cheno?
Sorry, so this is a question on what are the people we need. Sorry, I didn't completely get the question. I was having a
let me take that again. Jenny Hodgson says, intermediary suggests something called transactional, all premised on movement of money and nothing to do with people and communities. And here we are rethinking how we need to be doing things to ensure that our people, our communities are at the center of all our engagement. So what are those critical principles, critical values, critical actions we need to prioritize to ensure that our communities and our people are at the center of every humanitarian or development initiative we are driving?
Thank you very much, and apologies, I didn't get it earlier on. But yes, I think it's some of the things I've been saying, which is it's a trust-based system. It's believing in respecting local agency and understanding that change happens in communities that are led by people, and finding ways to adapt the aid infrastructure to support them and not the other way around. It's not to make them become part of the aid infrastructure, in this neo-colonial way, but to find creative ways to get them, make sure they have access to resources that they can use to imagine freely and to try and fail. And that's important too. Failure is a privilege. They give organizations they give a lot of resources to big donor agencies, and they fail. But somehow the idea that they give small resources to local groups, the risk of that failure is so uncomfortable for this infrastructure, for this aid agency, that they have to put in place all these measures. And they put all these measures in place and give the big money to all the big intra-global organizations, and they still fail. Under Ebola, the money got lost. A lot of the money got lost. The money went to big organizations from time immemorial. So it's important to acknowledge that. And I agree with the notion that intermediary, again, makes you, it removes the power, again, the agency of these local actors. The fact of the matter is, for us at Purposeful, and we do move resources, but we are part and parcel of the movement. We are partners. Our principles is based on how we partner with our allies. And we think about how we understand that the role we find ourselves in is a position of privilege where we can attract and move those resources, but we try to do it in a respectful, ethical way. And we really insist on making sure that our resources are not strings attached. So we're really moving much more and insisting on unrestricted funding. And that's really important. We fund you because we see you and we trust you and we believe what you're doing. And you are allowed to fail. You're allowed to spend it to pay salaries. And that is important, because your lived experience and the very fact that you exist and do what you're doing in your communities is important. And we find creative ways of making sure that when you want to report and tell your stories, you're reporting in ways that empower you, but not in ways that make you need to act, to basically just have to continue to act for us. You know, these shows that you put on for these donor agencies whenever the donors are coming. And those are the things we need to challenge. So I think at the heart of it, directly to your question, it's rethinking the way the system works and thinking about people as people and trusting them and believing that they have the knowledge, the agency to be able to think, to imagine, to try new things, to fail. The right to fail is very important, and try again. And that's how these systems and infrastructures will be built in a different way that embodies how we will act without these restrictions that are imposed on us.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you very, very much. And before I come to you, Alhaji Tanko, Janet Mario says, let's be proactive in changing and defining or shaping this agenda. Let's mobilize local diverse resources. Let's explore alternative funding to our work, etc., right from community level to our middle class to investments, etc. When we have external funding, it's a good time not to be comfortable so that we also change the aid architecture. Thank you very much for that contribution. And Alhaji Tanko, I keep coming to you because I understand Star Ghana has this very close relationship with its communities, the communities that you work with, the stakeholders you interact with to respond to collaborate with community members to respond to their needs. So what are some of those things that you would advise us to take into consideration, you know, to ensure that the people, the communities we work with are actually at the center of initiatives that we are driving?
Thank you very much. Yes, okay, so you can hear me now. Again, like I said, we are seeking to do those things. It's quite early days yet, but there are a few things that we've tried or we are trying. The whole thing about co-creation, co-development, that even when we get funding from a donor, that is about, say, livelihoods, for example. I think the thing is, before we put in the bid, we seek out those who are interested in and working in that area or affected by the issue to look at what do we need to do so that we don't come back with a fait accompli. We have had money, we want to do ABCD, so your role is this. So that whole issue by a concept of co-creation, I think, is quite important, that right from the beginning, we jointly define what needs to be done, who needs to do that. Particularly because, you know, we are seen as a big organization with, you know, capacity inputs and etc. So if you don't start from the beginning, if you don't do start the co-development early, your very power, your control of the money, you know, becomes disempowering. And so the organizations are keen to say yes, because if they say no, we might not give them the money. So I think starting at the beginning is important. Then the second is actually the feedback loops, you know, which include, of course, accountability mechanisms that to develop the kind of spaces that enable very genuine, very honest, very frank conversations about what is going on and how people experience what is going on and what needs to be done. Sometimes when we put that together with the learning spaces, you know, a few things get lost, you know. So I think we've tried consciously to separate those feedback spaces, those accountability spaces where we account to each other, from the learning spaces where we meet to look at, okay, what are the big, the programmatic lessons that we're learning, how do we document that, and etc. So I think that also puts everybody on their tools, because we receive feedback and we also give feedback. And we've tried to find develop strategies that respond to the context of the different types of organizations that we work with. And I remember when we started reaching out to the small, less formally organized CSOs, one advice that I received and which has guided us was that help these organizations to develop, but you don't necessarily have to help them to become replicas of yourself. You don't clone these organizations into images of yourself. And so we had to take time out to find out, how do we work with, this less formally organized CSOs as against those that have been used to working with donors and have all the systems and etc. So a more nuanced approach to working with the different sections of civil society. I think that we found that quite important. And then the languaging. So we talked about the things like value for money, etc. How do we jointly, come to a shared understanding of what that means? And so at some point, we had to try and, conducted a research with our partners on alternatives to the ways in which we measure value for money. So some came up with, let's look at the social value of the projects that we're doing and etc. And so in reporting to the donors, at least we could say that, yes, we're reporting against the metrics that you gave us. But these are also alternative ways of reporting on the value of what we're doing. And that helps, again, to shift the conversation. So the evidence-based engagements, I think, are quite important. I've talked about the spaces for engagement and how inclusive are those spaces, and we should also translate that even the ways in which we engage with Western or Northern donors and etc. That sometimes the kinds of spaces disempower us, that we're not able to speak as we want to because those are not spaces that we are used to. So in terms of the spaces for engagement with our partners, we should look at spaces that are inclusive, spaces that don't intimidate, and spaces that allow everybody to. And then we've defined our role around what we call the 3 C's framework. C as in a cat, So the first C stands for helping to convene dialogues, inclusive dialogues at all levels of governance around specific, issues. So we see our role as a convener, or facilitating convening by others, because everything should start with dialogue, with conversations. The second C stands for catalyst. How do we catalyze the actions, recommendations from these dialogues, the convenings, And again, it's not as if Star Ghana itself has to catalyze, but that we could support the partners to take up the actions. And the third C stands for coordination. Facilitating, supporting coordinated actions. So we don't have silo projects dotted all over this without any linkage with broader systemic challenges and etc. So how do we help to connect organizations, to connect initiatives in such a way that 2 + 2 is more than the sum of, more than 4. And then the learning, which cuts across all day. So it is not like a linear process, start with convening, go to catalyzing, end up with convening and learning, coordination and learning. That you could actually start with trying to coordinate actions, which will require convening dialogues and maybe catalyzing actions and etc. So that's how we define our role very broadly. That's the 3 C's and then L. I'll stop here, but just a very brief point to the earlier conversations about, what do we need to do? As you may know, Ghana started this very ambitious policy or program called the Ghana Beyond Aid. The government launched it with a lot of fanfare. But I think because the foundation work had not been done, they hadn't thought through what does a Ghana Beyond Aid mean? How do we replace or fill the gap that will be left, created by, moving away from the aid system as we know it. The government just rushed into it and realized that, it really didn't have the capacity, the resources, etc., to implement it. And so now it's just become a slogan. And I think that as we embark on this journey of localization, or whatever we choose to call it, that is better. Let's look at what does it mean? What are the implications? What are some of the difficult decisions that we need to take so that we have laid a very good foundation, a very good basis, a very strong basis for us to move forward as owners and drivers of our development processes. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I like the angle of also rethinking through the implications, you know, of whatever choices we make. So I will just go around. We are about wrapping up this discussion, and just to assure you that this is just one of many, and we'll definitely let you know when the subsequent sessions will be coming up. But Cheno, what is that one last word or recommendation you want everyone here present to take home with us after this conversation?
We are powerful. We have a lot of power. We don't have to be complicit in taking power away from us. And if we come together and demand on our own terms, that would be the beginning of shifting the system. Thank you for having me.
Very powerful indeed. I was almost speechless. Demanding in our own terms. I really think that will really help us to shape the destiny of our communities and of our institutions. Gima, what is that one last takeaway message you want our audience to have from this conversation?
Thank you, Jim. I think we need to organize, generate our own resources, and by resources I really mean cash, people, time, you know, organize those and channel them into the issues that are of interest to us. I like the discussion or the idea of a Ghana beyond it, because that's exactly the right direction of thinking when you want to free yourself and you want to have things on your own terms. You have to start thinking about how to free yourself and do things on your own, because the truth is that foreign aid is, to me, like palliative. It will take away some of the pain. It will never cure the problem. We will have to cure the problems on our own. So we have to organize and generate our own resources and then channel them into the things that are of interest to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I come to you, Eme, there is this very interesting contribution by Susan Githaiga. We local NGOs and foundations also need to look at ourselves in the mirror and be genuine with what we see. I really think that is equally a take-home message that we should use, you know, to as we shape our thinking, our practice post this conversation. Eme, what is that last piece of advice, recommendation you want us to take home after this interesting conversation?
So thank you so much for having me on, and then it has really been an impactful and insightful time, both with other speakers, listening to everyone, and then in the comment section. And I would really hope that at the end of all this, both African grant-making foundations, African grant makers and philanthropists are more moved to investing in civil society here in Africa, in giving more to building structures within non-profit organizations, giving more to build capacity, and not, as Gima said, not capacity for them, but capacity initiatives by the non-profits themselves. This will go a long way in creating sustainable structures, creating sustainable impact in the long run, and then also in knowledge building and management as we go on. It's great to be here, guys.
Thank you very much. In line with the element of structures, a contribution from Coco says, in order to overcome this intermediary role, local organizations must, as a matter of fact, put their governance, program structures, and vigorously build the capacity of their staff members, create visibility. That way, funders can directly send money to them without the need for that middleman syndrome practice. And it's really important to note that when we are putting in place these systems, these structures within our organizations, we should do it for us, for our people, for our communities, as opposed to doing it for an external authority or external party that may be controlling in this regard. Alaji Tanko, the last panelist, not the least, words of wisdom that we can take home after this conversation.
Thank you. I don't think I have any words of wisdom to add to what my co-panelists have said, so I completely associate myself with the last words that they have. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very, very much. And colleagues, I am really, really sorry that I couldn't take all the over 300 comments or questions that were shared in the chat section, but I'm happy that many of us have read them. At this juncture, I would like to invite one of our partners, Jenny Hodgson, who has really been a key driver, a key actor, a key collaborator, an equal partner, a thorough example of an equal partner in the entire process. We've heard from Star Ghana. It will be good to hear from our colleague, Jenny, and then we will equally hear from the representative of management at WAXI. Jenny, what takeaway message should we gather from this conversation in together for close to an hour, 50 minutes? Jenny?
Jim, thank you. Wow, this has been a complete Zoom workout. I've been listening, I've been following the chat, I've been following it on Twitter. I'm completely exhausted and thoroughly inspired. Great meeting, great contributions. I think my takeaways are, firstly, this should never be about trying to fit into the boxes designed by people and structures on the other side of the world with a completely different view of the world. Secondly, this has to be about a vision of the societies, the systems that we want for the societies, the worlds that we are part of, our vision for the future. And my last takeaway, which is really the kind of how do we take this forward, is we need to organize. And this meeting, the participation, the contributions has really pointed to the power of there is energy and appetite out there, and people, it's time to build on this. So super inspiring and exciting, and thanks for everyone for your contributions.
Thank you very much, Jenny. And I would like to invite my executive director, Nana Afajino Asantewa. Nana Asantewa Afajino, sorry. Please, Nana, it's been an interesting conversation so far. We are very, very glad to have you share with us. What is that last piece of advice that we can give ourselves after sharing in the last few minutes?
I think a lot has been said, and I want to pick up on something that Jenny just said that reminded me of Tajuddin. For those of you who know Tajuddin, one of major activists who died some time ago. And one of the things he used to say is organize, don't agonize. And I think that we really need to organize properly and work in solidarity around building African philanthropy. And working with organizations like the GFCF and African Philanthropy Network and others who are already, they've already initiated the discussions and we are looking at the structures. Let's work together, find ways of working together to really make all these amazing discussions and ideas that we have practical. Because the conversations we are having now related to localization, being African organizations mainly that are leading and discussing this, is being had at the funders level globally. It is being had at the INGO level. And so we need to decide and structure our own model and our thoughts using our own, the knowledge and information that we have. How do we structure our resources? How do we work in solidarity? How do we build our assets? Because we do have them. How do we then work in respectful partnerships with others? Because we are in a global system. This is not like us alone. And become more interdependent than dependent on especially looking at the global north, global south divide, how can our own resources be valued? And how do we value ourselves and what it is that we have and bring to the table? How do we work with partners to come up with benchmarks of success that work within our context? Something that we ourselves are looking at. I think all these things are important so long as we continue to be dependent. the person who pays the piper, I think, calls the tune. And therefore, if we want to be in a position where we are calling the tune, we have to look at what it is that we are paying and who we are paying, the resources. And that for me is important. And it's therefore important to invest in and build the systems that support our own indigenous philanthropy. It may look even different from foundations as we have them here, but we haven't even done enough research and also actually try out models to see what works. And I think that is important, even as we come together in different ways and on the different levels and spaces that we find ourselves in, to really bring about the change that is needed. Because I think we all agree, it has to change. Otherwise, we cannot have the sustainable development that we need. So I must, on behalf of WACSI, also our partner, Star Ghana Foundation, the GFCF, to really thank everybody for making the time to be part of this discussion. What I plead is that we find ways of working in solidarity on this continent, because we desperately need that at all levels to enable our talk become reality. That is what I would plead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. I will not try to add anything to that because I may rather dilute that very powerful concluding perspective. Thank you very much, Nana, for making it. Thank you to everyone. Alhaji Ibrahim Tanko, Eme, Cheno, Gima. It was good to have all of us share our thoughts on this very, very interesting subject matter. And of course, we will not cease to carry forward these conversations, ensure that we continue to brainstorm on what we can best define and design for ourselves. At this juncture, it won't be good for us to leave without taking some screenshots. I would like to invite everyone. We can turn on our videos. I think hopefully we will not get interruptions. And I'll invite my colleague, Fifi. Can you kindly guide us to take some shots of all of us present, you know,
yes, please,
defined group picture?
Is everybody ready, please? Do we all have videos?
Everybody's ready.
Okay, I think some of us still have our videos off. So if we could all, and with a lovely smile.
My video is not coming on. I've been denied access to the video, so I can't be in the photo.
Please, yes.
You are denying people access to the video. You blocking people's video.
Sorry, please. I don't think I have that. Please, what's your name?
Now I'm on. Yeah, I'm on.
Okay.
Me too. Sidiki, is the same situation here.
Yeah, me too.
So please, is everybody ready?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to take it.
Pour moi, moi aussi, je ne suis pas visible. Ma caméra n'est pas active.
Number of people, so everybody will get their 10. Thank you. So 1, 2, 3.
Hey.
Let's vote.
I'm showing my big head.
That food. Okay, I think that'll be all. Thank you very much, everyone.
Only your beard, though.
Okay, thank you.
Only your beard.
Thank you, Mr. Emmanuel. Thank you once again.
Let me take out the video.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, everyone.
From Asia. Thanks to the colleagues at WACSI, Omolara, who did everything possible to join us. Unfortunately, technical challenges that did not permit her to be with us all through the conversation. Thanks to everyone, and we hope to have you all in our next conversations. Thanks to the team at WACSI, Afif, John, Angela, Nancy, Balo, Sidiki, the entire team. Charles, Frank, for your contributions. And we wish you all a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye.